Hi, my name is Nick DiMaselli, and I'm doing my Racial Ignite presentation on lending discrimination and the racial wealth gap. I will also dive into things such as racial disparities in access to business loans for minority groups. Lending discrimination occurs when lenders base credit decisions on factors other than the borrower's creditworthiness. These practices have negatively impacted minorities in all types of lending, such as mortgage lending, as well as unequal access to business loans, and it has been going on for decades. It is important to talk about the history of lending discrimination and the legislation passed to try and prohibit these practices because it gives insight into how long minorities have been dealing with these issues. Currently, there are 3 laws passed that prohibit lending discrimination, and they are all based on a number of factors. The first piece of legislation passed, which ultimately was unsuccessful, was the Fair Housing Act of 1968. This aimed to fix residential segregation by preventing individuals from marginalized communities from being discriminated against in the sale or rental of housing and prohibited banks from practicing redlining. As a result, in 1974, Congress passed the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which forbade credit discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, marital status, and age. However, even with these 2 laws passed, redlining persisted in low to moderate income neighborhoods. The last act passed was the Community Reinvestment Act of 1978, which was intended to prevent redlining and encourage banks to help meet the credit needs of all segments of their communities, especially the low to moderate income neighborhoods. Before these laws were passed, a practice called redlining prevented minorities from accessing credit. Redlining is a practice of denying financial services to residents of certain neighborhoods due to race or ethnicity. The term was coined in the 60s to describe maps that marked minority areas in red, displaying them as hazardous to lenders. The HOLC created color-coded maps in the late 30s and classified them under perceived level of lending risk. Each color represented a different level of lending risk, and what people do not realize is that these actions, which took place decades ago, set the foundation for systemic racism and discriminatory practices. This is a map of Macon, Georgia, which was the most redlined city in the U.S. at the time. Green means it is a hotspot and mortgage lenders are willing to make their maximum loans. Red meant hazardous and was characterized by detrimental influences in a pronounced degree, undesirable population, or an infiltration of it. This is another example of a redlined area in San Diego. It is important to note that red areas were predominantly neighborhoods with minority populations. Capital would be directed towards white families in blue or green areas and away from black families in the yellow or red areas, which further perpetuated the wealth gap. A 2018 study shows the economic and racial segregation created by redlining still persists in many cities today. 74% of neighborhoods the HOLC marked as red more than 8 decades ago are low to moderate income communities today. 64% of the red areas are minority neighborhoods today. Even though discriminatory lending practices are prohibited, black borrowers and other minority groups remain at a disadvantage. Some of the lingering effects of redlining include higher interest rates, lower home ownership rates, lower personal wealth, and lower approval rates for loans. Face-to-face meetings between mortgage officers and homebuyers are being replaced by online applications. However, lending discrimination has not gone away. A study found that both online and face-to-face lenders charge higher interest rates to African American and Latino buyers, earning up to 11 to 17% higher profits. Aside from the home ownership rates shown in the slide, the national home ownership rate for black families is 44% compared to 73.7% for white families, according to a 2020 report. The same report found that the typical homeowner in previously redlined areas has gained 52% less in personal wealth from property value. Discrimination goes beyond mortgage lending. A new report from the Business Journals found white neighborhoods receive roughly twice as much per person in small business loans compared with black neighborhoods. Similarly, predominantly white neighborhoods receive, on average, about twice as many small business loans per capita. Unfortunately, black-owned businesses face a system set up against them. Since 2008, the number of loans made to black-owned businesses through the Small Business Associations program has decreased by 84%. This comes in spite of the fact that we have seen a 48% growth in the economy and an 82% rise in commercial loans. As you can see, black business ownership declined over 40% between February and April of 2020, which is the largest drop across any ethnic group. Black-owned businesses were less likely to handle mandated closures from COVID due to a lack of access to financial relief. Minority-owned businesses already had lower access to capital and credit, and lower average revenues, making them less prepared to face the financial hardship caused by COVID-19. They even had difficulties getting capital during the pandemic from governmental programs such as the Paycheck Protection Program. PPP loans reached only 20% of eligible firms in states with the highest density of black-owned firms. The success rates of these loans were also higher for whites at 60% as opposed to only 29% for blacks. A sad reality is that black-owned businesses were forced to shut down due to these racial disparities. To conclude, black-owned business ownership could be the key to reducing the wealth gap and achieving a greater economy. Black business owners have 12 times more wealth compared to blacks who do not own businesses. A recent study found that they also contributed to 165 billion in revenue in 2016 and created over a million jobs.